Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on Ion Fury's Aftershock DLC. This is something we've been waiting on for quite a while. The original game released back in 2019, and I reviewed it back then. And if you're watching this video, I'm going to assume you're familiar with the original game. If you're not familiar with it, you can check out my original review, which I will be throwing a link to in the video description box, as well as in one of those cards that pops up on the screen here. So if, for whatever reason, you're not familiar with Ion Fury, go ahead and watch that original review, or better yet, go and pick up the game and play it, because it's absolutely fantastic. But otherwise, let's go ahead and continue into the DLC here. This DLC has been in development for quite a while. Like I said, the original game released in 2019, and this DLC only released this month. As I'm recording this video, that's October 2023. And I am extremely happy to report that it was well worth the wait. To be fair, a lot of that is certainly due to the fact that it's basically just more Ion Fury, which is more of an absolutely fantastic thing, so there's not really much to complain about there, but they've definitely gone beyond simply making more Ion Fury. This DLC, of course, includes the things you typically expect from a proper expansion pack, like, of course, the new campaign that's set after the events of the base game, and is actually fairly lengthy. It clocked in around 5 hours for me, playing on the second highest difficulty. And much like with the base game, you're dealing with pretty massive levels that have ridiculous amounts of detail packed into them, a hell of a lot of secrets to find, so many that it's pretty much guaranteed you're not going to find all of them on your first run, and there are plenty of challenging combat encounters to keep you on your toes. As far as brand new content goes, they've added in a couple of weapons in the form of some extra ammo types for the disperser, which brings it up to 4 total ammo types, with the 2 from the base game being the shotgun and the basic grenade rounds, and the 2 from the DLC being gas grenade rounds, which are unfortunately not all that practical, as well as the frankly kind of overpowered explosive pellet rounds. And then pretty late in the campaign you get access to a brand new weapon called the Homewrecker, which is a lock-on plasma cannon that annihilates most of the enemies in the game in a single shot. And it follows the same trend as the chain gun, which in the base game, and of course in this DLC as well, was attached to a mech that you destroyed and then you salvaged it and got to use it for the rest of the game. Same kind of thing happens with the Homewrecker, only it's part of the hover bike that you get access to and spend a good portion of the campaign using. And thankfully, unlike previous build engine games where the vehicle controls were always pretty clunky, the hover bike in this game actually controls quite well. The only real problems with it are that it doesn't have a health bar of its own, so whenever you take damage, it goes directly into your own health and armor, which is a bit weird, but is not that big of a deal once you get used to it. And the strafe speed on the hover bike is very slow unless you're also moving forward, so you can't just circle strafe around enemies very easily with it, and instead have to fly in and attack them more directly. But apart from those slight issues, it's a nice addition to the campaign. It gives you some variety as to going around on foot versus on the hover bike, and even the part where the game is technically having you race against the clock, it's not really a big deal. You can take as much time as you need to. There's even a boss fight during the hoverbike sections where you're flying down a canal. It switches over to a third-person perspective, and you have to dodge an incoming ship's projectiles and mines and such, while also trying to shoot it down. It's admittedly a fairly simple boss fight, but it feels like a nice capstone for the hoverbike section, and it ends up making the whole thing feel like a welcome addition as opposed to simply a gimmick. In addition to the new ammo types for the disperser, the new weapon, and the hoverbike, there's also some new power-ups, including things like an energy drink that slows down the game, which is meant to simulate bullet time, I guess. A device that is a blatant reference to Ghostbusters, where you throw it down on the ground, it spits out a flame jet, and it sucks enemies in. As well as a power-up that is a blatant RoboCop reference, where when you activate it, it puts scan lines over the screen, gives you invulnerability, and infinite ammo for the Loverboy, as well as has the Loverboy shoot in 3-round bursts. And while I unfortunately didn't get much use out of the energy drink or the flame jet power-ups, the RoboCop power-up was very useful. Altogether, the weapons, the hoverbike, and the power-ups are all nice additions to the arsenal, and they work very well against both the returning enemies from the base game as well as the new enemy types that they added into the expansion, which includes some basic grunt-type enemies with the gas grenades and such like that, as well as some additional soldier-type enemies, including a chain gunner, which is, as you might expect, a bullet sponge that can dish out an awful lot of pain, as well as some new experiments from the main antagonist of the game, Dr. Heskel. While there's not anything particularly drastic that's going to dramatically change the way you play the game, all of these new additions make the combat loop of Ion Fury, which was already ridiculously satisfying, even more satisfying. And when you combine that with the excellent level design and the rather lengthy campaign, you end up with a recipe for success. If you wanted more Ion Fury, then Aftershock definitely fits that bill. But they actually went even beyond simply adding in a new campaign as well as some new items in it. They also added in an arrange mode that lets you play through the original campaign of Ion Fury with new areas as well as new enemy encounters, so you can even have a fresh look at the original campaign of Ion Fury instead of just playing through it again. And as if all of that weren't enough, they also threw in an extra difficulty setting called Angel of Death. If, for whatever reason, the already rather challenging hard difficulty wasn't hard enough for you. And when you look at the whole package, it's more content for an already fantastic game, and the new content is just as good, if not even slightly better than the base game in a lot of ways. Really, the only major complaint I have about the DLC is that there is a section during the main campaign where you have to go through some catacombs, which are a bunch of rather narrow passageways that are very dark, so it's very difficult to see what you're doing. You end up getting ambushed by enemies an awful lot, and it just ends up being fairly frustrating. Thing is, it is a rather brief section of the campaign, so it's not actually that big of a deal. And so, if you were wondering whether you should pick up the Aftershock DLC, well, let me put it this way. If you liked Ion Fury, definitely pick up the Aftershock DLC. If for whatever reason you haven't already picked up Ion Fury, go do that, and you might as well get Aftershock along with it, because it's more content for an absolutely fantastic game, and it just makes the overall package that much better. And on a more personal note, after the absolute travesty that was Starfield, going through the Black Labyrinth DLC for Medieval along with this particular DLC for Ion Fury has been one hell of a breath of fresh air. Thank you all very much for watching. If you like my videos, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that is perfectly fine, I understand. But the option's there if you're interested. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all in later videos.